Hello and welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Fara Sax. Joining me today is a member from the Aventura Marketing Council, Russel Lazega. He is not only a local attorney and an Aventura Marketing Council member, but he is also a self-proclaimed indie author. His book, Managing Bubbie, tells a true story of his Bubbie, which translates to grandmother in Yiddish, and her escape from the Nazis and the last 40 years of her life on Miami Beach. It goes back and forth from laughing to crying. It is amazing. You've got to get the book. There's so much to talk about. Russel, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Farah. It's great to be here, and a happy and a healthy new year to you.
God bless. So let's jump right in. You're an author and an attorney. Like, how does that work?
I had spent a good bit of my life practicing law, but always wanting to tell my grandmother's story, and wound up selling millions of dollars worth of books about law and making money that I'd never really encourage anyone to read. And all the while in the background, my grandmother, who had an incredible story of escaping the Nazis as a single mother pregnant with two young girls, and my father was the baby she was pregnant with, hawking me and pushing me. I want you to write this down. Tell my stories. $1 million they'll pay you for this book. And I went on with life, never paying it much mind until finally I decided to do it, and no regrets looking back.
So this is not a recent endeavor, because I was reading somewhere where you started it, you shelved it, and you took it out again. Is that what happened?
Oh yeah, I had while my grandmother was still alive, she passed at 95. I had started just collecting her stories, and wound up deciding to try to publish this book. And I was fortunate. I had a good friend who was a successful author, and so I decided to approach her about it and said, "Will you help me with this?" And being the good friend that she was, she said, "Russ, leave me alone, for crying out loud. Everybody's hawking me to sell their books. I love you, honey, but no." So I left it on her kitchen table thinking, let's see what happens. And I get a call the next day. "You little SOB, you left that on my kitchen table hoping that I'd read it." And yeah, I kind of did. She said, "Well, I hope you don't mind. I loved it. I sent it to my publisher, my agent in New York and Connecticut." And it turned out the agent was former head of Penguin Books. They called
not
me
too shabby, not too shabby, Russell.
Just for some, little punk from Miami Beach who winds up sending it off. And I get a call literally the next day. They're faxing contracts and everything's going great. And I've got this big time agent. I'm thinking I'm going to be the big time here. And finally I get a call a little bit down the road from my agent in New York. I could hear the smoke coming through the phone. Russell, honey. They love you. They think you're wonderful. They want to publish you, but they say this story, it's too Jewish. They don't get it. How do we sell this in Kansas? I don't know how many people are reading books and buying books in Kansas, but the publishing world, which was honestly mostly Jewish, felt like nobody would relate to this Jewish story. And so they made me an odd offer. She even says to me, "I don't understand this offer. Did you sleep with Bill Clinton or something? You don't get offers like this unless you've done something scandalous. They want you, they'll sign you, but they don't want your story."
So it reminds me so much. I just have to interject. Jackie Mason did a whole routine. He goes, too Jewish. So it's the same sort of thing, right?
It was. I think as Jews, we probably heard these stories and we just assumed the rest of the world wouldn't relate. And so I got really frustrated. I hung it up. I became a lawyer. I built a successful practice, started selling law books and books about making money. And I did very well with those. But I always had in the back of my mind, I've got to tell my grandmother's story. She was always talking me. "I want you to write this down. They'll make a movie. This is the story people need to hear." And so in the middle of the night, I woke up and said, "You know what? I'm just going to put this out there. There's all this create space and self-publishing platforms, and I put it out there, not knowing what would happen. And 20 plus awards later, it took off. And the funny thing is that the people who responded were immigrants and people who never heard these stories. My best reviews were in Kansas. They had no idea about these stories, or more often what I would hear is other immigrant groups, Russians and Chinese going, that's my mother, that's my grandmother. You know, she's impossible, but how do we tell her what to do when she survived so much? I mean, my grandmother escaped the Nazis, but she also escaped 6 assisted living facilities in 5 months and got kicked out of every home in town. We didn't know what to do with her. And so people were relating to this. I mean, my wife, who's Cuban, and her family, that's my mother. Mira, Castro tried to kill me. You can't tell me what to do. And so, you know, it started to resonate not with who the publishers thought, a Jewish market, but a big American market of people who have immigrant families, an older family member from the old.
Absolutely. It reads to me like a love story. It's a love story that you shared, and it goes from, we're going to get into like some of the events that happened with your grandmother that's just insurmountable, what she went through and survived. But it really tells also the immigrant story. And it's so relatable because even here in Miami, we are such a melting pot of cultures and of backgrounds and diversity and living through atrocity and coming up and making something of ourselves.
It's so true. Currently just progressing in trying to develop this. I go around the country talking about how wrong the publishing industry was about dealing with a difficult parent who's from another world, another generation. It's a universal story. Struggle and escape from places of oppression are a universal story. And my grandmother never got caught. She made it because she was someone who went left when everyone else said right. When they said, Jews, go sign your name on that dotted line, she said, I'm going the other way. And I think so many of us know and have someone we love like that.
So let's talk about Bubbie. And like I alluded to, Bubbie in Yiddish is an endearment for grandmother. And let's talk about, because the book, again, goes from here to then to now to World War II and back and forth. And it's an amazing, if you haven't gotten it, Amazon has it. So managing Bubbie, I'm going to do a little plug right now. Okay, I did the plug. Okay, let's get back. So tell me about her. Let me get to know her when she was in Poland with 3 children by herself, running through countries. And because there's one story in there when she meets the SS officer head on, and she's like at a pub or a hostel. I don't know exactly where she was again, but tell me a little bit about her and her story so we get to know who Bubbie really is.
You know, Bubbie was somebody who didn't have a lot of money, didn't have an education. She was a simple seamstress and a mom. My grandparents.
And her name was Leah, right?
Her name was Leah, and they had a tailor shop. She had immigrated from Poland to Belgium, where they were living a middle-class life. She had 2 young daughters, school age, 9 and 7 years old, my aunts, and the war broke out. And so she had to run and ultimately had to do it on her own. Her husband wound up in a French concentration camp, and my grandmother broke him out of that concentration camp while she was pregnant with my father. And he decided, well, I can stay and fight my wife or go and fight the Nazis. And he decided to take his chances with the Germans and left her to, he wasn't a soldier. He was 5'0", skinny guy. But he was a funny guy, an amiable guy. And so he was kind of the official bartender of the resistance. And he went and hid through the war and survived the war, hiding with the resistance. But it left my grandmother running from country to country, something my grandfather didn't want to do, was afraid to do. But she did it, ultimately running all through France. And like you'd mentioned, making it to even the south of France, coming face to face with Nazis, having a SS officer in a pub playing with my father just before Christmas. And managing to just wit her way through that to make it out the door where she faced the Pyrenees Mountains on foot to get to Spain, which wasn't much better. But she never told her story with sadness or regret. She survived by being impossible. And so when I set out to tell her story, I really worked hard to avoid lingering on sadness and tragedy. That wasn't who she was. She was, it's a miracle I survived. I never thought I'd live this long. And so I wanted to bring that through. And I hope I brought that through in telling her story. It was a little hard telling a story that has so much levity and humor. When you're talking about the Holocaust, the publishers were like, "Is it a comedy about the Holocaust?" No, it's about the comedy about dealing with a very tough, warm, impossible survivor of the Holocaust.
Absolutely.
and her escape, her incredible story of escape, and why people like her were so tough.
And she was a gutsy woman. She had a lot of grit, and I just felt like I got to know her in the flashbacks and in the present through the other family members, because you go back and forth into the Miami Beach life that she led for 40 years back to World War II. Did she tell you oh, it was like nothing? Did she flick it off, or did she actually really live it with you and try to get you involved in what was happening? Because there's such a strong, I've found with survivors, my mother-in-law who survived the camps, she was just very matter of fact, and that's how she survived. Did you feel that with your grandmother?
She definitely was very aware of how lucky she was, but she didn't linger on it as a negative. I know some people can't talk about it. For her, she escaped, she survived, and that was always a matter of great pride. Oh, you don't know what I lived my life, that I should live to 90 years old. Who would think this could be possible? And that was, just what kept her going. And she was happy in a little 1-bedroom apartment, pushing her little shopping cart to Lorenzo's. And I never thought I'd have it so good. And if you saw her little apartment, most of us would think, yeah, it's pretty humble and modest, but 9 great-grandchildren and however many, 9 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren. And that to her was her source of pride. She had a Picasso piece that my aunt, who was an art dealer, gave her a signed lithograph, and took down all these nailed piece photos of bar mitzvahs and weddings and grandkids that she literally nailed them to the wall herself, and put the Picasso up. And a week later, I come to her house. Picasso is sitting in the closet. The pictures of the bar mitzvahs are back up on the wall. And I look at her, I'm like, "Bubbie, what'd you do?" And she says, "Look, the painting was nice, but an ox with 2 heads? Nah, that's this guy's story. This is my story." And so that was her accomplishment. Was simple, just building a big, happy, crazy family, and surviving. And there's no prize she could have ever had more than that. And that's the story I set out to tell, and why I put the whole 1980s literally at a family brunch table with this crazy, large, Jewish, Seinfeldish family of people from all over the world, because that's who we are. That's Miami. Everybody is from somewhere else, and nobody speaks the same language. And I wanted that table to be where the 80s was set, to show the struggle we were dealing with then, which is she was aging and she wasn't taking the right medication. She needed medical help. And this is a person who survived by never quitting, and by doing things her way. And that was the struggle that we faced for her later in life. A more humorous struggle of, the cat and mouse of her getting kicked out of assisted living facilities.
God bless her. God bless her. How old was she when she passed?
95.
I feel her sitting here. She's like, "Oy vey, he's telling the story, but I don't believe it. I don't believe it."
Yeah, it was always a chess match for sure.
Junior, can you just show some of the pictures? I'm gonna pop up, and maybe you can just tell me and just give me a couple of words or thoughts that you have when you see these.
Oh my gosh, that was her pride and joy. And there are actually two pictures that look almost identical in my book. One of me as an infant getting kissed the same way by Bubbie with the pride on her face and the look of kind of shock in her on mine. And then my nephew Noah, who has that same look and that same round face. It's the same face my father had, because I wanted to show this passing of tradition. This family continues on through the photos, through the memories. The same round face, and that was actually one of her first times meeting with her great grandson at that time, and my sister-in-law looking in panic as her 89-year-old arms or whatever are struggling to hold him and shaking, but she's not going to let go of that baby for anything.
They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it truly is. Junior, can you flash the next one? Tell me what's going on here.
Oh, phenomenal story. You'll see to the right two young girls and an infant next to a tall man.
Yes.
That infant is my father, and his two sisters below him next to the nun and the tall man. That was a ship of 50 refugee children that were brought from Portugal to the United States. Eleanor Roosevelt managed to finagle 50 visas for children with no parents. So after my grandmother's incredible trek all through Europe, across the Pyrenees Mountains on foot during Christmas and winter, landing in Spain, she managed to aggravate the consuls so much, literally, when she heard that they were going to allow 50 children to get to America, that she got my father and his two sisters on the list of kids who would leave to the United States with no idea if they would ever see their parents again.
And we're going to just do another.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, the late Gavin MacLeod, and such a, we do say a mensch, a wonderful, wonderful man. What I wound up doing with this project is, I had originally done this as a book, and one day I'm doing a book signing in Miami at a big synagogue, and I'm thinking I'm going to sell a ton of books. This is great. The crowd is cheering. They're engaged. They're asking questions. They're laughing uproariously. I go to my book signing table and I sell like 3 books. So I'm sitting there talking to this older retired lawyer, an older man, and I said, "So did you like the show?" He says, "The show, the book, yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful." I said, "Well, I barely sold any books. What happened?" He says, "Books? Huh? We don't see." And so I got the idea. You know what? Ding. Audiobook. I need to do an audiobook. And so I wound up reaching out to try to develop this audiobook, got the attention of some folks in Hollywood, who then got me connected with Linda Lavin, who plays Bubbie in the audiobook. And she is
right. Yeah, I want to hear more about that audiobook. Tell me how all that happened. It's just incredible. You have like the stars of who's who and what's what and everywhere where.
Out of nowhere. And it literally started with my cousin Melissa's an agent in LA.
You know a lot of people. My cousin, my brother, my uncle. They help me all along.
What can I tell you? I got a million relatives.
Not that.
So she just suggested I reach out to this casting person who connected me to Linda Lavin and her people, and they knew it was what we call a mitzvah project. This was not a big money-making venture for them. This was in the hopes to tell an important story for Jews and other refugees from around the world. And she jumped on board and did it. And with that followed a number of other celebrities. Once we reached out.
Lainey Kazan, one of my favorite.
And her dear friend, I didn't even know they were close friends until we connected in the recordings. Renee Taylor, if you remember, the mother from The Nanny, Sylvia Fine.
Love her.
Lainey Kazan jumped on board, and Gavin MacLeod, who both of his son-in-laws are Jewish. He's a very religious Christian. And took us out to lunch in we flew out to Palm Springs, recorded with him. He bought us lunch where we saw, like Nancy Sinatra and all the.
So you were like pinching yourself. This is really happening to me.
Really the captain of the Love Boat. Come on. and he was just so wonderful. And he said, look, everything I believe, religiously, everything I'm taught is this should never, ever happen. And so he was compelled. He really felt compelled. He said, I want to tell this story. This is something I want to be a part of. And it was just really beautiful to see this sort of train of people. Judy Tenuta, who's a comic, and she said, I want to try something dramatic here. Can I do this? I'm looking, going, this is the wackiest comic I ever met. She wound up delivering this incredible dramatic performance.
How long ago was the audiobook produced?
It took about a year to do. I was flying to New York, LA, Palm Springs to do it. It was released in, I think, 2017. And it's been out since on Audible, and it actually was a regional submission for Grammy. Didn't get past that, unfortunately, but I was really thrilled and honored to to see it get there and be named. So that was a beautiful.
So what's next? What's going to happen
What's next?
Let's see.
I really think I should make a movie about making the movie. Actually started working on that. The short answer is the folks I've worked on with the audiobook, a dear friend of mine, Ethan Smith, who's been an actor and producer and director out in LA and Atlanta, got involved, and we wound up teaming up with the producer of the film Crazy Heart that Jeff Bridges won the Oscar. Maggie Gyllenhaal was nominated, and have been working on developing it as a film. And we now have our director, Ed Hall, who is a director from Downton Abbey in England. And hopefully we're working right now on finance in the UK. And I'm having to do what I call translation to England of trying to explain a big, crazy Jewish family to a very refined picture. The director of Downton Abbey, whose family started the Royal Shakespeare Theatre Company. And I'm trying to explain George Costanza's parents as your central cast. But he's a brilliant director, and I he's got a phenomenal eye for it. And so, but there's certainly a comedy to be made in this very refined British group.
Wow, that's like an oxymoron ready to happen, huh?
It is, and the jokes that are involved are endless. Trying to to go from Mary Poppins to Woody Allen is a bit of a challenge, but we're doing it and having a great time in the process. So.
I could feel it. I could feel like your grandma there is like quelling for you. She's filled with pride at this moment.
I had never shown her the book. I interviewed her for hours upon hours, and there were other recordings too. She'd been in books and in documentaries and things, and I gathered all that, but I never recorded her because I never wanted to taint the image, the perspective. I wanted to just tell her as she is. But looking back, she probably would have been the first one to say, let the truth be told. I am what I am, But,
Absolutely. So tell me, in the couple of minutes that we have left, something that we might not have discussed or something you want to share?
Oh my goodness.
Even the legacy that this project might bring for you personally.
I certainly now venturing into the world of film, but if I were to talk about something I'd love to share, it's probably a few bits of Bubbie wisdom, if you will, just to give a feel for who she was.
Sure.
I used to get calls almost weekly that my grandmother had won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. How could they I finally tell her, this is, everybody gets this. How could they do such a thing? These said schmuck men. I want you should make a lawsuit on it. And so I had to navigate my way into convincing her that suing Ed McMahon over the Publishers Clearinghouse was not a great idea. Let's see. We had a theory that Ronald Reagan was my long lost great uncle.
That's interesting. How'd that come about?
My grandmother had a theory because her parents were actually theater folk back in Europe. If anybody who knows Jewish culture knows there was this vibrant Jewish theater in Poland. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents were sort of the bottom of the rung of that. They housed the actors and hustled to sell theater tickets and kind of violently hated each other, but they were match made together. And so that was how it was. Well, one of my grandfather's brilliant ideas was, we're going to go strike it rich in America and look for gold in California. It took 50 years for the news to get to Poland in 1909 or 1910. And so the only thing that did happen was, along the way, as they were here venturing unsuccessfully for gold, was my grandmother's sister was born in the United States. And so she was an American citizen. And so when my grandmother sought papers and fought to get here, the first thing they look for is, well, who were you going to stay with? Who were you going to? And she was able to say, I have a sister in America. And that's really what got her out. But the misfortune for her, and it's an interesting tale on immigration, if you will. She was born as her parents' ship basically hit the shores to Poland. They were pregnant with her when they left. Had they left a month or two later, she would have been able to do like her sister, go to the American embassy when the war broke out, say, hey, I'm an American. What can you do for me? And they gave her sister $50 and a boat ticket and said, welcome home. And when you read my grandmother's track and what she went through, it's kind of a marvel of, that the process, a little perspective on how incredible it is to be born an American, candidly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to thank you, Russell, for giving us this opportunity to share just a little bit, cracking the door open of your grandmother and your Bubbie. Where can people buy the audio, the book? Do a little plug. Go ahead. I'll give you a couple of seconds.
Love you for that. Thank you. Amazon is certainly the easiest. The audiobook is on there, Kindle or hard copy or paperback. Have a version coming out in Spanish soon. Be looking for that. But right now, Amazon's certainly the easiest outlet.
Thank you so much. And Bubbie, if you're listening to us, you got a real mensch of a guy here.
$1 million to pay you for the story. Right.
I want you to come back when it's the $1 million moment, okay?
I'm still waiting for that one. Thank you, Fara. It's a delight.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for tuning in. I'm Fara Sax, and this has been The Community Voice. Stay safe. Take care.